So right now, the soca artist Trinidad Killa has a hit song, but the thing is, that song uses a slur offensive to many Inuit people. What do you do when a word with a painful history is still being used by people who don't understand that history? The group chat's here. They have thoughts. Let's go. I'm Elamin Abdelmahmoud, and this is Commotion. Okay, we are kicking off today's show with a story that involves this song right here.
Hi life, good morning, we nice, you know this, the vibe, the feeling alive. You know out in the cold, miss this one when it snow, and I can't fight the feeling, and I wish I could be there for you. You're out on the road, I write your name in the snow. Now I'm missing the feeling, and I wish I could be there with you. Now I'm feeling low.
That's a new song from soca artist Trinidad Killa. That song is a hit. It has more than 1 million views on YouTube. It's got a co-sign from Nicki Minaj. But it's also opened a sensitive debate among some DJs in Toronto's soca scene. And that's because the title of the song is Eskimo. That is a term considered to be offensive to many Inuit people. Kendrick Lamar has also had some online backlash fairly recently for using that word on his last album. Toronto DJ Dr. J, the Soca Prince, is here. Culture critic Sharine Taylor is here. And Inuk writer and culture critic Jamesie Fournier is here. Jay, Sharine, Jamesie, welcome to the show, y'all.
Welcome. Hi.
Hey, what's going on?
I'm really grateful you guys are here. Welcome to Commotion. Look, let's start with this song from Trinidad Killa. Jamesie, I'm going to come to you, and we're going to dig into the controversy in just a moment. But maybe I'll start with you, Dr. J. Can you just give us maybe a sense of Trinidad Killa's place right now in the soca conversation?
Okay, I mean, soca music is generally centered around carnival, right? It's very happy music. It's a festive music, and there's a lot of subgenres. So, for example, there's Dennery, which is, based in St. Lucia. You have Bashment out of Barbados, Jab out of Grenada. Bouillon is very popular now. That's out of Dominica. And there's also a genre called Trinidad, which is really Trinidad dancehall music. And Trinidad Killa kind of fused soca and zest. And he made it very popular. It kind of crossed over into Carnival 2019, 2020, and this is kind of his contribution to that. And as you mentioned, it is very, very popular right now, that particular song.
Sharine, what do we know about the inspiration for this song itself?
Yeah, so, the video starts off with Trinidad Killa and his mother. She's in a sweater, she has a suitcase in tow, and she's saying that she's going to be going abroad. I feel like this is the story for so many people. Definitely my story. A lot of people from the Caribbean who go abroad to work so that they can provide for their loved ones back home. She also mentions that she's going to be sending a barrel back. That barrel's usually packed with so much goodies and stuff for your family. But in the song, he also talks about missing the parties, missing the weather, which, on days like today is totally understandable. In many ways, it's an ode to Trinidad, to the culture, to the people. And it's also about migrating and relying on those memories to kind of keep you grounded in your new home.
Yeah, I imagine if you're waking up in Toronto this morning and you're looking at the amount of snow that there is, yeah, you might feel a certain kind of affinity and a certain kind of longing for Trinidad. And this song being about that, that distance, that's a lovely sentiment to want to capture in a song. But then, Jay, we start talking about the song and this title because it's worth noting that since the song started buzzing, you and then other DJs in Toronto have been trying to make sure that people also know about the racist history of the title. You played it on your radio show, and then also you could, so you could talk about it, and say, what, people got to know about the word and about the ways that it's being used. Why was that important for you and others to do, you think?
To be honest, there were so many elements that he kind of made some critical mistakes. First, he took an original rhythm that was produced by somebody else, and he tried to monetize on it. When he got the backlash on that, he reproduced it, came up with this name, and now it's like, okay, you don't even mention the term in the song. So
it's worth mentioning the word doesn't even come up in the actual song itself.
Right. So it's like, just trying to get people in our community who love soca, who are happy people, we're allies. It's like, just open up your mind and understand, because I think as Canadians, we may be aware of it, but people within the Caribbean or in the States, they might not be as aware of what this term means. So I really wanted to bring light to that.
That's a valuable context, I think. The valuable context of the idea, like maybe people don't necessarily know, but you know what, living here and knowing, that puts a responsibility on you to say, you know what, we gotta actually have this conversation. Jamesie, I want to bring you into this conversation here. For folks who don't maybe know about the term's history, can you briefly explain why it's considered a racial slur within the Inuit diaspora?
So I'm assuming a positive intent in all this. I don't know Trinidad Killa, but he's misinformed. But he isn't the only one. Eskimo is an outsider colonial term imposed upon Inuit that has had negative effects. It is a stereotype packed with racist imagery, and some people think it harmless. Yet it conjures up this image of the happy-go-lucky Eskimo that is harmful in its erasure that it actually carries.
This is also a word that I should say, like, until 2020 was the official name of Edmonton's CFL team. There are food, there are clothing companies that have profited off this word. Nat King Cole and the Christmas song is probably like the most famous example I can think of, chestnuts roasting on an open fire. I'm not going to sing the song, you know the song. Bob Dylan's used it. A lot of other non-Inuit musicians have used it in their songs. What do you make of how pervasive, the term is in pop culture?
Well, it's somewhat disappointing because Inuit have never called ourselves Eskimos. We have a variety of names, none of which are Eskimos. We are Inuit, Inuvialuit, Inupiaq, Yupik, Kalaallit, and it just goes on, right? And it's just disappointing that every time this issue comes up, because it's just so straightforward, right? Our own names mean basically the same thing. It's just the people. So it's disrespectful when you call us by a name that isn't ours, right? Especially if you know otherwise. And when institutions or people with influence don't care, it sets the example that this type of kind of ignorant, harmful behavior is acceptable, or even worse, that it's promoted against a certain group of people.
I think it is worth emphasizing here, like, there are sometimes debates within marginalized communities about whether a slur can be reclaimed or not. The obvious example being the N-word, but that does not end up giving outsiders the license to participate in those debates, to use those slurs in any way. But moving on, Trinidad Killa and Nicki Minaj are not the only artists to use the E-word here. Kendrick Lamar was called out for using it. He's got a song called Whacked Out Murals. I want you to hear a response from one Indigenous fan who goes by the handle Bravo_season on TikTok.
Kendrick, dog, you can't say Eskimo. I wish people would research what that word means to us and what they did to our people, bro. They're still finding bodies of women and children that they kidnapped to this day and finally bringing them home for a resting place. I don't want to be that guy, bro. Kendrick is a great artist, and I don't think he's racist or anything. I think he's just misinformed like 90% of the world because for some reason our history doesn't matter. Like, it's so stupid to me, man. God, I just wish everyone would research what it means and have a little bit more respect of what happened.
Jamesie, you hear the frustration there. Like, I don't want to be that guy, bro. What's your reaction to what he said there?
Well, I think when he's talking about like researching what that word means to us, right? It is a construct of a colonial mind, but everyone has been colonized and capitalized to some point. But that does not excuse us, right? We need to be consciously accountable people, which includes being respectful when we receive knowledge that differs from our own lived experience. However, when we are shown a gap in our knowledge and we continue to act ignorant and uncaring, that is harmful. That is a deliberate act of disrespect and erasure. And if you did the research of the terrible things that have happened and continue to happen to Inuit, I would hope that you would find yourself less inclined to use that word.
Sharine, it's been a little bit over 2 months since the criticisms of Kendrick began, criticisms like that TikTok. Kendrick has not really responded to any of those criticisms. We requested a statement from Trinidad Killa and Nicki Minaj about their use of the term. We didn't end up hearing back. What do you make of the silence around this, sort of like the normalization of the word?
Honestly, it's really, really unfortunate. Granted, as we've discussed here, people may not be aware or know the history, but I feel confident with its growing popularity that it's definitely been flagged by now. I've seen people talking about it on social media. And at the moment, as mentioned prior, the word hasn't been used past the title. And when Nicki Minaj says it in the intro, regardless, once or twice, it shouldn't be said at all. It's caused and is causing an immense amount of pain to Inuit. It's actually being reported that Nicki Minaj will release her verse once the song reaches 1 million views, I think, which is it's recently done. So I'm hoping in the forthcoming lyrics as well that we don't hear the term at all. I think it would be a great move for all parties involved that while making music, you're not offending or isolating communities along the way for the sake of a hit. It's really not worth it.
Dr. J, what's not lost on me is that like we have seen artists respond to these kinds of conversations. We've seen artists respond in really meaningful ways to these kinds of conversations. Worth remembering that like Lizzo, the Black Eyed Peas, Glorilla, they've all been called out for using insensitive terms in their songs. And they were able to acknowledge that they did. They were able to like record alternate versions. They released those alternate versions, and then they apologized, and and everybody kind of just moved on. It was not. It didn't remain a sort of persistent kind of conversation. If Trinidad Killa was to remove all references of the slur in the song, do you see the song losing any kind of steam if he just changed the title because it literally doesn't even come up in the song?
Yeah, definitely not. I think it would be an acknowledgement, and it might actually help the song reach even more people, because there would be a lot more people who would want to support the record because he made such a goodwill gesture. And I think it's the right thing to do. It's unfortunate that, a lot of times artists are so caught up in their own world and sometimes want to use negativity to further, because, sometimes they say bad press is, it's press. So they just want to get out there. And it's unfortunate that he hasn't responded to, whether it's your producers. I've personally reached out to them as well. Like, there's just been no reply back for them to own up to it and just change the title. Nothing is going to change with the song. You've reproduced it. It's a hit. People, as Sharine has mentioned, people gravitate to the message in the song. It relates to so many people. There's no reason to have that as the title, which is going to offend so many of us.
It's certainly a far cry from the tenderness with which Sharine was talking about, like the subject of the song, like the idea of like, hey, here's what this song can do for people. Here's what this song can remind people of. And then you will have people who say, I just can't get past the word that you've sort of titled the song.
Right.
So, Jamesie, maybe last question to you here, man. Even after the Edmonton Elks changed the name and other corporations have kind of like moved on from using slurs like this one, there's something about the damage of normalizing slurs that kind of like lingers. It just kind of hangs around a little bit. It has a bit of a lasting legacy. What are you hoping non-Indigenous people take away from this conversation?
Well, what I hope that non-Indigenous people would take away with that is just an outdated term, and it has been for a very long time, right? It is a term that has been forced upon Inuit, that is just simply not our name, right? And if you don't agree with anything I've said and think I'm wrong, I urge you to go out and just like find the biggest, scariest Inuk you can and just they call them an Eskimo, just like right out of the blue, just see what happens. And
I don't think I'm going to be doing that, Jamesie. I don't see that being the strategy that's going to work. No.
It should be interesting.
Well, I think that's a good place to leave it. I appreciate your time, all three of you. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jamesie, Dr. J. Sharine, for taking the time to unpack all of this. Jamesie Fournier is an Inuk writer based in Iqaluit, Nunavut, who is with me here in our Toronto studio. Sharine Taylor is a freelance music journalist and culture critic. She's in Toronto. And Dr. J is a Soca DJ and host of Soca Therapy on Flow 98.7, also based in Toronto. I'm Elamin Abdelmahmoud, and this is Commotion. Okay, you've heard us mention it on several times on the show, but TikTok really has become this gigantic, powerful force in the world of books. But the best example of that right now is with a book that recently became a bestseller. It's not a particularly well-known book. It's a translation of a novel from 1995. The book is I Who Have Never Known Men by the Belgian author Jacqueline Harpman, originally written in French. It is a slim dystopian novel, about 160 pages. It went from selling 2 or 3 copies a year in the UK to over 150,000 copies sold in the US and UK and Canada combined just in the last little while. Emily Gould wrote about this novel's sudden success with a cut, and she joins me now. Emily, welcome to the show.
Hey, it's really great to be here.
Tell me about the book. What is the book about?
So basically, there are these women who are trapped in an underground bunker. They don't know why they're there. And there's a child who's narrating the story who has no memories of life outside the bunker. Whereas the other women in the bunker, they have some memories of a normal life outside the world. And they are kept in check by these nasty but totally mute male guards who whip into the cage whenever the women touch each other, and when they're asleep, when they're supposed to be awake, or awake when they're supposed to be asleep, their lives are totally controlled by these men. And then one day the keys are left in the lock, the guards are killed, and the women escape to the world outside of the bunker, where they find a grassy plain that has been totally denuded of life. They find some other bunkers, all the people in them, all the guards also dead, the food stores left intact, and they have to figure, and they're on a planet that might be Earth, but it also might not be, and they just have to figure out how they're going to survive with this canned and frozen food from these bunkers and build their own society. There are only 39 of them, and just live out the rest of their lives in what seems like a world where they're all that's left of humanity. And the narrator, as the youngest one, is forced to confront the fact that when everybody else dies, she might be literally the only person left alive.
Okay, so that's everything you just said is the grimmest thing I've ever heard in my life. That is, it's like dystopia built on dystopia, built on dystopia, built on dystopia, which sounds great. I love a dystopia. But let's talk a little bit about the themes of this novel that are resonating. Because I have to imagine that there are so many different threads for to make the conversation on TikTok. So what are the themes that are resonating with the Gen Z readers right now?
Well, I know it sounds so bleak. And when I first started reading the book, I was just like, oh, I want escapism right now. Is this really going to be what is like good for me to read right now?
Yeah.
But actually, the narrator is so interesting because she is learning concepts like time and language and community just in this total vacuum. She's never known any kind of society other than the ones that these women, this little tribe of women, have created for themselves in this otherwise totally desolate world. And the way that they work together and also learn from each other is actually, it's such an amazing journey to go on in this relatively short, like you said, the book it's a quick read. Like you can get this done in an afternoon, which I think is also a big part of why it's become a bestseller. It's really nice to encounter a short book that's going to totally like zap your mind into a totally different plane of consciousness.
Yeah.
Like escapism is fine, but there's also just sort of being transported into a new way of thinking.
Yeah. And the idea of doing that so efficiently, right? The idea of like building a world and then transporting you to it and then building the entire sort of ethics and morality of that world in just 160 pages. Like that's a deeply impressive feat. Let's talk a little bit about the author. Jacqueline Harpman died in 2012 at the age of 82. Tell us a little bit about her career.
Well, she published a lot of books. I mean, this was, I think, her 6th or 7th book. None of the other books have been translated into English so far, but I think there are plans for that to change based on the huge success of this translation. I don't know that any of her other books have the same sort of speculative or dystopian flavor that this one does, but I do know about her that her family escaped Austria to Belgium during the Second World War, and they were Jews. So maybe that biographical information informed her ideas about totalitarianism, being, isolated and forced to make a new society. Just that kind of thing informed some of the themes of this book, that having lived through that history.
Gotta say, Emily, I wouldn't do what I do, and I don't think you'd do what you do if we didn't believe that like the choices that people make in terms of what they consume attempt to meet the moment in some kind of way, attempt to sort of like reveal something about how they're willing to cope with the world that they exist in. It's not a coincidence to me, for example, that during the first Trump presidency, we saw The Handmaid's Tale sales go up. They went up again when Trump was elected for a second time. there's something about books that become a place where you go to have certain conversations, or at least like process certain ideas that are happening around you. So when you think about this book, and relatively obscure book, becoming a viral hit in this moment, what do you think it is about this book that is meeting the moment?
It's inspiring to see the way that these women who, they didn't make a choice to live in a society without any men in it. But some of the book talkers who have recommended this book have explicitly linked its themes to the Korea's 4B movement, which is about women deciding that they're going to live a life without men. And even though the women in this book didn't make that choice, the fact that they form their own society in this world without men is sort of, I think, in its own way, inspiring to people at this moment. It's also just about shaking up our imagination and making really radical decisions about the kind of lives we want to live and the basic structure of society. And I think by the time you get to the end of this book, because I know you haven't finished it yet, you're going to find that instead of being bleak, it's a book that makes you feel really grateful just to be able to read books at all, and also to eat food that doesn't come from a deep freezer or a can.
I think that what you're describing there is it's a hard thing to imagine for somebody listening, I bet. We'd be like, but based on the premise that you said, it's really hard to imagine the destination being hope and actually arriving at what that hope looks like.
Well, we got to make the best of what we have, I think, is one of the messages of this book.
Yeah.
And sometimes what we have is really, really very meager. So, part of, I think, what's hitting in this moment is just acknowledging that even though things seem and are very bleak, and there's more news that seems like it's coming from a dystopia, especially for us in the US, like just hitting every day, we still have to take the time to be grateful for the fundamental freedoms that we do, for now, still have. And those include being able to read books, and being able to still have ideas and still have our imaginations, and to be able to imagine a different world.
With the time that we do have left, look, you're a novelist yourself. What lessons do you think the publishing industry should take away from the success of a novel like this one? A novel from 1995 that didn't really have much of a life before this one, and then it ends up being the book that so many people are turning to in a moment like this one. So what do you think the publishing industry can maybe learn from the success of I Who Have Never Known Men?
Take risks, be experimental. Don't just copy the same commercial successes that have worked over and over again. Don't make Xeroxes of an old hit and, slap a new cover on it. Instead, be willing to take risks on new artists, or even look to the past for inspiration, because ultimately you might find this hidden gem on a dusty old shelf somewhere, and it might end up really meeting the moment 20, 30 years later, and just having a whole new life. So
yeah,
that can happen.
I'm genuinely really inspired and really curious about this process of how novels from 20, 30 years ago have ended up starting to have these new lives. And part of that is because more recent translations, right? Like more recent translations help with introducing people to a new audience. But also there's something about the act of translation, which is you got to be intentional about that. You got to be intentional about going into the archives and saying, I really think this can speak to this moment. And I hope the publishing industry is listening to that and, trying to go back and say what needs to be translated to a brand new audience. Because I think that's one of the great things that we can do. Emily Gould, I appreciate your time. Thank you so much for being here. This has been really great. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, of course. Emily Gould is a features writer at The Cut and the author of the novel Perfect Tunes. My name is Elamin Abdelmahmoud. This show is called Commotion. Listen, we appreciate you being here with us. Tomorrow on the show, we're going to be having a broader conversation about American cultural imperialism and how that looks like from different parts of the world. From Ireland, what does that look like? From the UK, what does that look like? There are so many different questions I want to get to. I can't wait for that conversation. I hope you're going to join us. We'll see you then.